I zaczynamy kolejny panel. Europejski Sojusz Konserwatystów. Wspólna deklaracja. Do tej pory nasi paneliści zajmowali się
European
głównie
Conservative Alliance Joint Declaration. Our panelists so far have been discussing the matters relevant to the Central and Eastern Europe, and now let's have a look at the West as well. During the previous panels, we heard that the European Union that was joined by Central European countries back in 2004 was different from today, and it's also different from the one imagined by leftist and liberal forces in the future. And this gives a headache to the European politicians, those who wouldn't like to see such a turn of events in our continent. Does a fragmented right will become a thing of the past in the European Parliament? That's probably one of the questions that is going to be asked, and I expect to have very interesting answers. So what's the future of the right in the European Parliament? And Professor Zdzisław Krasnodębski, who's a member of the European Parliament, is going to host this debate. Over to you, Professor Krasnodębski. So in Europe nowadays we have radical leftist trends. So if we want to stop those new trends, we need to have an alliance of truly right-wing, conservative and patriotic forces. We need to talk to understand one another better, and this is why we have decided to have this panel. Thank you very much. I don't want to drag on with my introductions, as we have really outstanding guests. So the situation in the European Union right now is quite complicated. Those right-wing traditional forces are weak, and radical ideas are winning over when it comes to the climate policy, when it comes to the industrial policy, when it comes to ethical questions that we discuss with a lot of energy within the European Parliament. In which direction is the European Union going? Will it become a federal state? Will it remain a union of nation states? I think that this is going to divide our political scene in Europe, that issue. I'm not sure whether you have read the joint declaration, or declaration that we managed to create as a joint declaration of different European parties. This is the first step and a vital step. I think that after this offensive of liberal and left-wing forces, we need to be prepared. I think that very often we are manipulated by the left-wing forces. Very often we hear that we can't unite with Assemblée Nationale because they are too pro-Russian, or we cannot unite with other conservative parties because they are anti-European. And I'm deeply convinced that through dialogue we will manage to find the common ground. And I hope we will manage to find a common discourse and a common strategy. And I'm thinking also about the next elections to the European Parliament. and we should win those elections, or at least face bravely and our opponents and stop those radical tendencies. And now I will give the floor to our panelists, outstanding politicians, analysts, right-wing, conservative, patriotic politicians. I don't know how to label them, but overall they are towards the right of a political scene. So we have Nicolas Bay from the European Parliament. He's a member of the European Parliament from France. So how do you see our chances of meeting halfway, of finding common ground, of building a common alliance? We, conservatives, appreciate the fact that we have different histories, we have our differences, and we are really grounded in our respective national cultures. So we really appreciate it in a way. So in this context, how do you see our chances of finding a common ground? Thank you very much for this introduction and presentation. I'm very happy to be here with you as a member of this panel. Like you said, all patriots in Europe, and I think that I really like this definition. I think that patriots meet, they discuss things, they try to be together. As those who are against us, they are good at cooperating. Those who want to destroy the Christian foundation of Europe. Of course, we as conservatives are very close to our local cultures, national cultures, but we are both against authoritarian power of Brussels and against further federalization. Of course, our history has been difficult and complicated. At the same time, we have a lot in common. We share the same understanding of our values, Christianity, Greek philosophy. This is what binds us together in Europe. And apart from protecting our cultural heritage, we have other shared challenges that we have to meet. Whether we want it or not, we will face the migratory pressure in Europe. Whether we want it or not, we have a demographic crisis. Additionally, more and more industry goes abroad, and then we have this LGBTQ dictatorship. So I think that when it comes to fundamental matters that will impact the future of our countries and of our families, we can find a common answer and we can act together. You mentioned this joint declaration of 15 political parties in Europe, and I think that it gives us a sound foundation for future cooperation. We are all Europeans. We want European nations to grow, and we want them to have an influence. And then we'll need common actions. So we were very hopeful about the European Union, and here in Central Europe, I can say that the great peoples, that the great nations of Central Europe had a lot of hope when it comes to the European project. And now there is a lot of disenchantment, disillusionment. It turns out that the politicians from Brussels would like to tell Hungarians and Poles what to do, and it should be the other way around. They should respect the decisions and actions of national governments that were legally elected. So I think that this joint declaration might be the first step towards a further, closer cooperation. And I hope that we will be able to name our similarities and differences. And I hope we'll be able to act on our shared priorities.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, we should meet, and it is important that our societies should meet the political manifestos of the parties that we would like to work together in Europe. Often we learn about the developments in Spain, not from our colleagues from Vox, but from the press. And press often are dominated by left-wing liberals, so this picture may be distorted from time to time. So I hope that we will overcome the news monopoly. I would like to ask Jan Figel, our colleague from Slovakia. Let's change gear, geography, if you like. Can I ask you about something? We had a previous panel about Angela Merkel and her legacy, and there was a representative of the Czech Republic, the former foreign minister, and I noticed, and he is a Christian Democrat, and I noticed that it was obvious for him that Europe should be more federalist, that it should move towards more competences endowed with European institutions, and leadership in Europe he thought was German. Christian Democrat, but it should be, this war its successor. Now, can I ask you something? There's sometimes the impression that here in Central Europe, our conservative, our way of construing the right-wing concept goes back to earlier references, Thatcher and Reagan. Ronald Reagan. So the economic conservatism, and on the other hand, it comes from tradition. What do you think? I mean, are we going to be able to create independence? Can we challenge the centrist Conservative Party that still believes it has the monopoly for some of the issues that we would like to reformulate or redefine in European politics? So let me ask you about Slovakia. Are we going to find partners in Slovakia to get into this project? Hello, everyone, and Professor Krasnodębski, thank you very much for your words. I'm from the other side of the Carpathians.
If I may continue in English for the clarity of the words. We have a problem when the words change their meaning. It was Confucius in ancient China who said, when the words lose their meaning, our freedom is under threat. And this is the reality in our countries, in Europe, which means we need to understand each other, otherwise we are lost. It will be a Babel tower if we don't understand each other. It doesn't mean one language. There may be many dialects, many languages. Conservatism, liberalism, it's not easy to define, Conservative Party in United Kingdom is totally different from the party I was young, or you mentioned Margaret Thatcher. Okay, I am not commentator here. I was leader of Christian Democrats, and I think this is important, that we have clear understanding of our culture, our roots, our identity, what it means. Robert Schuman and Konrad Adenauer, Alcide de Gasperi, they were Christian Democrats, and they were good patriots of their countries. They were not traitors, although l'Humanité treated, the communists in France treated Schuman as traitor. He was not a traitor. He was visionary. And their dream was Europe as a mosaic, one mosaic, not Eastern and Western, but one mosaic, with many different and important pieces, French, German, Slovak, Polish. And this is something very precious, because it speaks about unity in diversity. Unity in uniformity is a Bolshevism, is totalitarianism. Unità ma non uniformità in Italian. So where is the source of unity? I think that there are important answers for unity, for real unity, not quasi. And now we are tested with different crises, financial or political or even medical, whether we mean it or it's a talking shop. I made sort of 3 points for my contribution here in Karpacz, which are missing. I think I was commissioner in Brussels during Barroso I. I was chief negotiator on accession of Slovakia to the Union, working then also in our government, in parliament, first EU special envoy on religious freedom. So my experience, there are many good things in European Union currently. That's why we have it, why we are in, but we need to improve it or reform it, which is usual homework of each generation. I cannot build a good house for my son, but my son, when he is adult, independent, will construct his house, learning from the father or forefathers, and building house for the late 21st century or mid-21st century, or for his time. We need to adapt Europe to our times. And when I read, for example, Charter of Fundamental Rights or founding treaties, there is quote or there is recital of European values. You know them? There are 4. It's dignity, human dignity, freedom, equality, and solidarity. I agree, we agree, but I think, and I am more and more sure, that, for example, the value of justice is missing. Strong Europe, in my mind, is a just Europe, righteous Europe, which is fair towards the neighbors, towards the globe, which is not organizing unreasonable missions or invasions, but working on justice for all, for people in Middle East, for people in Africa. Justice is the first priority of politics, any politics, global, local, regional. Justice is missing. Second point, which I subscribe to, and your declaration is quoting as well, is subsidiarity. Subsidiarity is second name for freedom, other name for freedom, because we are free as citizens, as human beings, and then we transpose our freedom to a local or regional or national government. This is democracy. But subsidiarity needs to be preserved, protected as a principle, not as something, sometime, somewhere. As a constructional definition principle for future of Europe. And the third point I wanted to say here, because By profession, I'm engineer, and now I'm also in the European Institute of Innovation and Technology. European Union after Second World War was a political innovation. It was something unprecedented, very new, but very important for reconciliation, for peace in Europe, for future of Europe in full sense. And it works, but it needs to be improved, adapted. But any adaptation, any reform must deliver what I said at the beginning, a mosaic. European Union not as a super state, no, but as well-organized community of people and member states, or people and nations, which effectively serves to the needs of these people and states. If this is our objective, if this is our vision, I think we will find the ways and the means how to adapt it. If this vision is lost, then we have a problem. And in that sense, I think we need also Christian Democrats, not only to remember and quote Adenauer or some other people or Schumann, but to be their heirs, their sons and daughters. And I would like to contribute in this direction. Thank you. Dzięki bardzo.
Dziękuję bardzo. No, mogę tylko odpowiedzieć na to, że rzeczywiście być może się mylę.
Indeed, I may be wrong. And we observe that Christian Democrats are in deep identity crisis in Ukraine. That's what we hear. And this is one reason for us to start thinking about other ways of working in Europe. You raised a very important issue of justice. There are more funds available now with the word just in their names, Just Transition Fund, to name one. But I suppose there's a growing sense of awareness that justice is missing, and there's something else that is missing that was present in the Cole's generation, and that is respect. I would like to ask Jorge Buxadé from Vox, chief member of our group, what do you believe are the chances and opportunities for the right wing? Now, I'd be extremely happy if we could work with the right wing of the current EPP, if possible. Now, what do you see the opportunities for collaborations are? And secondly, when we speak of deficit of justice and respect in Europe, am I right, or is it just me being Polish and exaggerating a lot?
Profesor, hablaré en español. La verdad es que, y algunos que hemos estado en la redacción, en la negociación de esta declaración conjunta, sabemos de la dificultad de haber llegado ahí y de la importancia de haber.
We have contributed to the drafting of this document, and we understand the weight and importance of this document.
Lo mejor es que pone de manifiesto que hay muchos partidos en Europa que han detectado el problema.
Most importantly is that most parties in Europe understood that we have a problem.
Cuando se firma el Tratado de Roma, en Roma,
when the Treaty of Rome was signed, and it wasn't signed in Rome by accident, who would have thought that abortion was allowed in the country and across Europe? Who would have thought that ideologically charged activists would read our schools. Who would have thought that the migration policy, and who would have thought that the criteria that can be used in the Netherlands and Belgium can be used in Greece, Spain, and Italy, where 35 to 40,000 new immigrants arrive in the countries every month. Who would have thought that environmental policies in all member states would be defined by Greta Thunberg and Agenda 2030, which is implemented by bureaucracy and Brussels elites. Nobody thought that possible at that time, I suppose, but here we are. We are now at a time and at a point where we defend the right for life, and we defend the right for control in the way our children are educated, and we want control over the protection of our landscapes, and of course the landscape of the Carpathians is different than the landscape of Andalus. Now we are thrown out of Europe with a label of being anti-European. Now this declaration, what it does, it emphasizes the need for frontal confrontation. I mean direct confrontation. Elites in Europe are in crisis, the migration in 2015, the permanent economic crisis, Brexit, and instead of asking Europeans for forgiveness, elites are organizing conferences about the future of Europe, where they talk about reducing individual freedoms with more freedom to be assigned to Brussels. So I suppose the declaration of 14 or 15 parties, different, strongly different from one another, and with different backgrounds. Vox is a very young party. We're still learning from our colleagues from Law and Justice and other parties. Now, this is an extremely important document, and there's one more strength of that document. The 3 pages define what we are all united by: the defense of family, the defense of the impacts, the defense of demographic growth in Europe. Christian democracy requires us to be, requires that we choose one of the alternatives, and we're meeting a day after we learned that Hungary would not be able to use the restoration fund, the recovery fund, sorry. Now, we have formed a group, and perhaps we should strengthen the group, and we should make sure that there are more and more parties that will join the declaration. And how are we going to act in Brussels? Well, it's politics. We will do whatever makes more sense and is most effective to achieve our goals in each case. Now, there are those who are dreaming about creating one big group. Well, that's an option, but in the European Parliament, there's the radical right. There are liberals who are right-wing. There are Greens, right-wing. There's classic right-wing. There's the People's Party that is sometimes painting itself left-wing, with left-wing colors. So there are more groups, and sometimes we think that there are more than there really are. And what Nicholas said, we should have a shared sense of working together, voting together, and doing things together, acting together. We should get to know each other well. As a deputy chair of Vox, I should learn more about the issues in Hungary, Italy, Poland, Romania, etc., in all European countries, because I need to be aware of the fact that a hit against a party in one of those countries will be will contribute to my failure. My colleagues in other countries have no clue about what's going on in Spain. European socialists understand the developments in Spain, and they will defend Spanish socialists. Now, when it comes to the judicial reform in Poland and the censorship around Poland because of its reform, how come Spain has a very similar system? Brussels says nothing about it. For me, I'm a Spanish patriot, and Spain is absolutely number one for me, but I also understand that our common shared space is very important. Thank you. I see that there's very little criticism about the content of the declaration. I suppose many people with moderate views would be inclined to sign this declaration. Now, we have left it open on purpose for all political parties, all political factions who would like to subscribe and join us, and who, for all those who, like us, see similar threats. In its spirit, it's a highly pro-European declaration. Now, let me move back to Central and Eastern Europe, to a very important country, a large European country, which is gaining in importance every year, and I mean Romania. And we have Simion, a member of the Chamber of Deputies, Romania. I would like to ask you about the opportunities for us to find allies for this concept, or supporters of this concept in Romania. Are we going to find allies for the Alliance for Freedom in Europe?
Thank you, Professor Krasnodębski. It's an honor for me to be here, and it's an honor for our young party to join the declaration of the conservatives and the patriots in Europe. It's time for unifying our forces, and after many years, it's time that in Romania a conservative party, a patriotic party appeared. That is why we entered the parliament last year, Romanian parliament, to defend our common values, which are the Christian faith, which are the nation, the family, and the freedom. Before entering our Congress room, I discovered a book, Living Torches, about anti-communist protests, about people who gave their life to fight communism and this Marxist plague. Richard Siviec, Jan Palach, Sándor Bauer, Jan Zajic, Marton Moises, all of them fought for freedom. Marton Moises was an ethnic Hungarian living in Romania, a Romanian citizen, who burned himself in Brașov city in Romania for freedom. Now, after 60, 70 years from their protest and from their extreme form of fighting communism, we found ourselves again fighting neo-Marxism. And again, fighting Bolshevism and this idea that we should be all the same. I'm only 34 years old, and my generation's hope for a commune Europe is not what is happening now in Brussels. We hoped for a Europe of freedom and a Europe of prosperity and a Europe of diversity. We shouldn't be obliged to give up our sovereignty, and that is why our party joined the declaration, and that is why our party in Romania is growing each day. Now the polls show us at 50, maybe 20% of the Romanian votes, and that is why we think we should be all together, all conservatives, all patriots. In Romania, since 2000, when the Christian Democrats fell out of parliament, we didn't have any conservative party. And in Romania right now, from our initiative, we have a vote for no confidence vote for the government. Probably the government will leave. And the media you mentioned earlier, the liberal media, the left media, is saying it's not possible that the government will fail because an extremist party initiated this motion. Why are we extremist? They say we are everything from pro-Russian to neo-Nazi. This is all fake news because they don't want a party like ours, like yours, to exist in Romanian political scene, in European political scene. For example, we cannot be pro-Russian. We, as a Romanian, historically speaking, we cannot be pro-Russian because Russia did, through the USSR and through the actual Russian Federation, lots of harm to Romanian people. And Poland also was affected because Poland, after the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, couldn't have its own state. So maybe us as a Romanian understand better why we can never be pro-Russian. And I think if all parties, all patriotic parties get to know each other through this kind of events, we would develop a sense of confidence between us and not reading all the fake news in the liberal media. That is why I am very glad we are participating here, and I am also very glad because everybody says that the West of Europe is lost. From our point of view, from our values, from the values of family, of defending the nations, of defending the Christian faith and freedom. But I am here with people from Vox in Spain, Fratelli d'Italia, Italy, and Assemblée Nationale from France. This gives me hope for a common Europe that is what my father and mother fought for, a Europe that is a house for every nation and a Europe that is fighting for freedom like before the anti-communist partisans. Thanks a lot.
Tak, dziękuję bardzo. Ja bym powiedział tak, w gruncie rzeczy nie chodzi o to, czy jesteśmy prorosyjscy,
It's not about being pro-Russian or anti-Russian.
po tej całej tragicznej historii
After
chcieli mieć
all that tragic
sąsiada
history,
europejską Rosję.
we would like to have a solid European democratic Russia as a neighbor. We would like to have the kind of Russia that shares our values. We all love Russian music, Tchaikovsky, we love Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, Russian literature. So it's not really about being pro-Russian or anti-Russian, but we need to be critical about what's happening in Russia. We need to be critical about the Russian regime, and there is a difference between Russian people, society, and the Russian regime. Of course, it's difficult to perceive them in abstraction, as the governments are formed in a way by society. I'd say that those who want to pay Putin for his gas, these are people who are much more pro-Russian. So, for example, Gerhard Schroeder, who wants to pay for the Russian gas. But I don't want to go further in this topic because it would merit a separate meeting. But you said one more important thing. We need a multipolar union. Now it's so trendy to talk about leadership. Everybody should be looking in one direction. I wouldn't agree. I think that we need a strong France in Europe. Very often I don't understand French politics. I think that it's very much about rhetoric when it comes to strong France. Italy is also very important for us, a very important partner. And now I would like to address our panelists from Italy. The left has understood that political fights are won before the election. They are won before any kind of political debate. Political fights have to be won on the level of ideas. That's why we need intellectuals who would support other ways of thinking. We need intellectuals to support conservative values. That's why I'm very happy to welcome Francesco Giubilei, representing a think tank from Italy, Fondazione Tattarella, and I would like to tell us about the Italian perspective.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you and congratulations for organizing this amazing conference. It's really important to share some ideas and values with some very important speaker as today. When we talk about conservatism, we have to talk about not only one conservatism. There is an important Italian writer. His name is Giuseppe Prezzolini. And Prezzolini wrote an important book. The title of this book is Manifesto of Conservative People. And Prezzolini explained when we talk about conservatism, we have to talk about many different conservative ideas. And when we talk about conservatism, first of all, we have to talk about a European conservatism. And in the other hand, we have to talk about an American conservatism. There are many differences from an American conservatism and a European conservatism. And when we talk about a European conservatism, of course, we have to talk about some different conservative ideas that grow up in every country. There is, for example, a Latin conservatism that shares the ideas of the Italians, of the Spanish, of the French, also of the Romanian people. But there is also, for example, a conservatism from Germany or a conservatism from the Center Europe, so a conservatism from Poland or from Hungary. I lived for 3 months in Hungary, and what I understand from Hungary, but the same is from Poland and all the region from the Visegrad group, is that sometimes as Western European people, we don't really understand what is happening in the Central Europe. We don't really understand what is happening in the Eastern Europe. And when we talk about a unify of conservative ideas, I think that the first important thing is to respect every country and to respect every government elected in a democratic way by the people. So sometimes when, for example, the Polish government or the Hungarian government or also the government from other Central European country decided to approve a law in their parliament, we have to respect what they decide to approve because this is the democracy. And of course, there are many differences from every European country and every European conservative values. But in the same time, there are many points in common. You mentioned before the Treaty of Rome. And the idea of the Treaty of Rome was made by Schuman, Adenauer, but was made also by De Gasperi, a very important Italian politician. And Schuman, Adenauer, and De Gasperi were three Christian politicians. And they understand how was important the Christian roots for our Europe. But unfortunately, after the Treaty of Rome, arrived two other treaties, the Treaty of Lisbon, and before the Treaty of Lisbon, the Treaty of Maastricht. And the Treaty of Lisbon and the Treaty of Maastricht are two treaties based not on cultural values, but based on economic values. And this is maybe the problem of this European Union, that is only based on economic values and not on cultural values. And in the future, we have two opportunities. On one side, we have the United States of Europe, so a Europe more centralized, more Brussels-based. And on the other side, we have the Europe of nations, the Europe of people. And I think that we have to underline the importance of the Europe of people. I want to very briefly to underline 5 points that, in my opinion, the conservative and this declaration signed today is quite important to go in this direction. So I want to tell you 5 points that, in my opinion, the conservative has to follow. First of all, it's important to talk about in a different way the migrants problem. When some illegal migrants arrive in Lampedusa or when some migrants enter in Europe from the Balkan roads or enter in Ceuta and Melilla in Spain, they are not entering only in Italy or in Spain or in Hungary or in Poland, but they're entering inside the European Union. So it's not only a problem of one country, it's a problem of everyone. The second point is the importance of our Christian roots. I think that Europe must help the Christian persecuted all over the world. Sometimes we forget the Christian people and we forget the Christian people that are suffering in some part of the world. The third point is the birth rate. We never talk about the family policy or the birth rate, but we have a very, very strong problem in every country all over Europe about the birth rate. Another important point is the environment policy. I think that we have to talk about environment from a conservative perspective. Roger Scruton wrote a wonderful book. The title of this book was Green Conservatism, and he explained how it's important to talk about the environment problem from a conservative perspective, starting from the local before then the global. And the fifth point is talking about the Mediterranean area. And to finish and to answer your question, I think that our country, Italy, can play a very important role in the future of Europe. We are the third economy inside the European Union. We are one of the founders of the European Union, and we are still a conservative country. We are a Western European country, of course, but in the same time, historically, from our perspective, we are in the middle of the Mediterranean area, and we are between the Western Europe and the Eastern Europe. And I think we can really play an important role in the future, especially in the Mediterranean area, especially in the Balkan area, especially in the North Africa. When you talk a lot about Russia, but we have also talked about China. We have to talk about the danger of China that is entering in our economy. We have to talk about sometimes the problem of Turkey that is entering in Libya, for example, or the problem of Turkey that is entering in countries like Serbia or Montenegro or Albania, that were countries linked to the Europe. So in the future, I think that Italy can really play an important role, but it's important that what we are going to do is to create, not only from a political perspective, but also from a cultural perspective, a strong alliance, because how Gramsci explained in his book, when we talk about the concept of the cultural hegemony, the left sometimes is better than us in having media, in having foundation, in having think tanks, publishing house. We have to underline how it's important not only a political fight, but also a cultural fight. And so conferences like today are very important, not only from a political perspective, but also from a cultural perspective. So thank you again, it was a great pleasure.
Tak, thank you very much. Ja muszę dodać, że jeżeli się bliżej poznamy, to myślę, że nasi
If we get to know one another better,
we Włoszech, we Francji,
then we'll see that our
przypomną sobie
friends
niektóre
in
zapomniane
France,
rzeczy,
in
że na
Italy
przykład,
might
jeżeli
remember
chodzi,
some of the things
że
they have
polska tradycja
forgotten.
polityczna to jest
For example,
tradycja włoska
Polish
przeniesiona do Polski.
political tradition is actually Italian tradition that was implanted in Poland.
Przeniesiona do Polski.
It's
Złoty wiek Polski to jest
It's the
wtedy, kiedy
tradition
królową
of
była,
the Italian Republic that was implanted to Poland.
Bona
We had
Sforza, że nasze hymny
Bona
do siebie
Sforza
nawiązują, że nasz hymn
as the
mówił
Queen of
Napoleonie
Poland
Bonaparte.
during our heyday.
Francja nam pokazywała,
And
jak
then
zwyciężyć.
in our national anthem we mention Napoleon Bonaparte. So these are those close links that show us that Europe has always been a whole. It has always been like this very complex, intertwined network. Even in the 19th century. You mentioned Roger Scruton. He was my friend back in the 80s. I had two very good friends, Timothy Garrett Ash and Roger Scruton, both Englishmen. They both got very much interested in Central Europe. They understood that what was happening here would decide the future of Europe. Timothy Garrett Ash is now a professor in Oxford. Now the position is different, it has changed. And Scruton came here. He was very much criticized by his left-wing colleagues for spreading conservatism, but he used to say that he was a real European because he understood the Czechs and the Poles. Luckily, at present we also have intellectuals who move from the West to Poland, for example, who want to play this very important role. And I would say that right now it's much easier at present to have an intellectual influence. So, an intellectual figure, a thinker who tries to build bridges, intellectual bridges, is David Engels, a conservative historian who has been living in Poland for some time. So I would ask you to assess from your point of view whether we actually need that kind of alliance and what are the chances of building such a cooperation.
Yes, thank you very much for the kind invitation. I'm really happy to be once again here at Karpacz, also at the conference on 30 years of Europe, of the Carpathians. And to respond immediately to the question, yes, of course, we need a common European conservative front in order to address the numerous challenges which have all been mentioned here during this panel. And it is very clear that all conservatives, as they find themselves in the common declaration, also have very common and similar positions, be it on the European technocracy, be it on LGBTQ ideology, be it on the risk of Islamization, be it also concerning the love for our own tradition, for our own Western civilization, and of course also our attitude towards the family. So myself as a Belgian, as a convinced European, I'm really happy that at last there is this first sketch of a common European conservative group against all these numerous threats. But this should not somehow hinder us from seeing also quite a number of differences that still exist between our different European conservative parties and which will need to be addressed also during the next years, and urgently addressed also because, as you all know, we are living really in an extreme state of urgency, of menace, of seeing our Europe as we all love it destroyed from on the within and the without. So there are a couple of different issues I would just like to mention very quickly, but just to show that we need to consider this common declaration not as an ending point, but rather as a starting point and as a first step on a long way, which we will have also to cross very quickly. So one of the first point, of course, is the necessity of what is the moral basis on which such a future Europe, as we all want it, needs to be constructed. Is it based on the tradition of republican secularism on the one hand, or rather of Christian tradition on the other hand? And I think that, for example, many positions of the French Rassemblement National on the one hand and perhaps of the Polish peace are quite different to that extent. So we would really need to find a common solution. And I think one common solution is certainly the fact that we remember that many of the problematic values of today's secularism have been designated, for example, by Chesterton as Christian values gone wild. So I think there is a possibility of founding again a common Europe on Christian values without renouncing certain ideas of republicanism or of the Enlightenment. Another point which has already been alluded to, and so I can be quite quickly, is of course foreign policy. Do we want our common Europe to be rather focused on the Atlantic, or rather focused on an Eastern alliance with Russia, perhaps even with Eurasia, as some people seem to want it? So I think that is also a very different debate. That is not just a foreign policy debate, but also a debate about what is the real soul of our common European civilization. And I think that the solution also lies in this, because this conflict between the West and the East lies in our common identity, and we need to solve this first, and to solve it by thinking about what must have absolute priority, that is the interests of Europe as an autonomous civilization state that is free to ally with everyone, but that has to absolutely to defend its own strategic, material, cultural ideals. Once we solve this conflict within our own description of identity, then of course we can go out. But we must absolutely avoid to become satellites either of be it US, be it China, be it Russia, be it the Muslim world, whatever. Another point, of course, is Islam. I think we all see the threat of Islam, but the problem is, in what name do we want to fight Islam? Do we want to fight this civilization in the name of Western values, as many leftist, liberal people consider it? That is, we fight Islam in the name of LGBTQ rights. Is that the fight for Western ideology, Western identity? Or do we want to fight it in the name of our common Christian ancestral traditions? And I think this too is something that needs to be solved, even more so as I see some parties, for example in Germany, making advertisements for their own political party and saying we need to protect Western values such as Christopher Street Day against the attacks of Islam. I would say that there, in many respects, perhaps it is possible that some Muslims share certainly more ideals with conservative Christians than perhaps with many woke people from the leftist liberal side. And so I'm convinced that constructing a common traditional Christian identity and also political identity may perhaps also be a clue towards how to integrate these large masses of Muslims who are now so present and nearly dominant in France. Of course, we have also to stop migration, to try to hold it back, but we will never, I think, be able to hold it back completely, as some seem to want this. A last point, I think, is certainly the social sphere. In some milieus, conservatism is often seen as being identical with liberalism, something with which I would have certainly some problems, as liberalism is currently leading itself to absurdity under our eyes, and as also the leftists have shown how they can ally themselves very easily with ultra-liberalism, and how on the one hand a planned economy and on the other hand big tech, big data, big business go very well together. So that is why I think that this conflict also between a liberal conservative and a rather social conservative can certainly only be solved by going back to the old idea of the Christian social social law and by remembering once again about this social teaching of the church and of course ideas such as corporatism. And then perhaps as an outlook, I think that of course we all want to fight for common united Europe from a conservative basis, but we have to distinguish of course two facets of this. We have to distinguish the interests of Western Europe and of Eastern Europe, and I think and I hope also that the eastern half of Europe can become in the next years a real bridgehead for the interests of conservatism also in the West, a bridgehead where Western conservatives can find peace, can find help, can find support, can find also ideological support in order to fight back and to go back and to bring back to some way conservatism to the West. These are just some random points on which I think the next month or years should certainly bring some form of clarification, so that this joint declaration does not remember just a pious wish somehow, but would rather also can become the basis, the starting point for an ever tighter union of conservatives, and thus also one important path towards a Europe that is neither the centralized bureaucratic Europe of Brussels, nor once again a distended, dissoluted combination of 40 small or middle nation states, but that is something in between that can be a real Europe that is home for everyone, that defends our identities to the outside, but that guarantees our identity, our tradition, our political subsidiarity towards the within. Thank you very much.
Tak, dziękuję bardzo. No, chętnie bym teraz zaczął nowy wątek i zapytał panów.
Thank you very much. I would be happy opening another thread of our discussion, asking question about the next steps, but our time is nearly up, or is actually up. So I suggest that we move the discussion to offline, outside this debate. And so unless there are questions, urgent questions, I'll stop here, but we will continue our discussion. This is not the last of our meetings. Thank you very much, and last but not least, I would like to hand in some diplomas that commemorate our meeting here at this panel. Thank you.